Welcome, precious viewers, to my YouTube channel at Gumi Jana's Legal Discourse. My name is Gumi Jana Festus Obichi. Today's video is for my Equity and Trust 1 series. Equity and Trust 1. According to our court synopsis in Nigeria, equity is divided into two parts, equity and trust 1. This with the general principles of equity, and that's for first semester. And then the law of trusts is the second part, and that's for second semester. Today's video is for the first part of equity and trust 1, the general principle of equity. And today's topic is introduction to equity. Introduction to equity. And the focus on the introduction is the meaning and history of equity. Meaning and history of equity is today's focus. So we are looking at what equity means and how it originated. There's the historical development of equity. And I have here with me the objective for this study, for this learning. What will be the objective, the goal for you, the viewer? What will you expect from this video? You are expected to know the following at the end of this video. First, you should be able to explain what equity means. That's the meaning of equity. At the end of this video, too, you should be able to relate the brief history of common law. Because as we shall be looking at the history of equity, you cannot conclude it without making reference to common law. Then you should be able to state the history of equity, how it originated in England. So that's what you're expected to know in this video. And this topic cannot be covered in a single video. So in this particular video, I shall be discussing the meaning of equity. The meaning of equity, and then subsequently in other videos I will now start discussing the history of equity, where incidentally we'll also talk about the history of common law. So let's start. What is equity? What is equity? First, let's look at the etymological meaning of equity. So the first meaning is the etymological meaning. So let's look at the meaning of equity etymologically. Etymology has to do with the study of the origin and derivation of words. So in English, some or most of the words we use are derived from other languages, essentially Greek and Latin. So most of the English words are derived from Latin word. The word we are concerned with here, which is equity, is derived from Latin word. So equity is derived from two equivalent Latin words which are acquaintance, or if you may wish to pronounce it, uh, acquitas. If you may wish to pronounce it, acquitas. But the pronunciation I'm getting from Black's Law Dictionary is acquitas. So you may wish to pronounce it acquitas. That is one. And another word, aquos or aquas, which means even, fair. So aquos means even or fair. The same thing with acquaintance, means fairness, evenness. So etymologically, so if you are to define equity, you can start with the etymological meaning by saying that etymologically, equity is derived from the Latin word acquaintance, which means fairness or equality, or aquos, which means fair or even. So that's the etymological meaning of equity. Furthermore, equity has two major meanings. Equity has two major meanings, or there are two major senses in which the word equity is used. So equity has two senses in which it is used. And one sense is, or one meaning is, what is regarded as the general, broad, common, or untechnical meaning. So equity has the general, broad, common, and the untechnical meaning, or the untechnical sense, the broad sense, the general sense. And then it also has the uncommon, the legal, and the technical meaning or sense, the narrow. So equity is used in both the narrow sense and also in the general sense. So we shall now look at these two senses in which the word equity is used. So the first sense is the broad sense, the general sense, the common sense, the untechnical sense. You can also regard it as the layman term. So what is equity in the layman term? So in the broad sense, or generally, equity means what is fair. Equity in its broad sense means what is fair, what is just, what is moral, what is ethical. It means equality. That is the general meaning of equity: fairness, equality, evenness. And it also means it is also similar. Equity in general sense is also similar to justice or natural justice. So in its natural sense, it also means it is synonymous with natural justice. So equity means fairness, evenness, even-handed dealing. So once a case before the court is decided on what is considered to be fair, to be just, to be right, to be ethical, then equity is said to be done. So equity is said to be done in that case once what is considered to be fair or right has been done. Because in a general sense, it means fairness. It means just, the quality of being fair, the quality of being just, the quality of being impartial. It means impartiality. So all those positive words that have to do with doing something in the right way, in the proper way, is equity. So that's equity in a general meaning. A good example of equity in this sense can be seen in the various high court laws. So the high court laws of the various states enjoins the court to observe and enforce the observance of customary law if it is not repugnant to natural justice, equity, and good conscience. So equity in that regard is the equity in a general sense. So the word equity as used in the various high court laws which enjoin the court to enforce natural justice that is not repugnant to natural justice, to enforce customary law that is not repugnant to natural justice, equity, and good conscience. So that equity there is the one in the general sense. So court are to enforce customary law if it is not contrary to what is just, what is fair, what is right. So equity in that regard is in its general sense. Also, examples of equity in a general sense can be seen in the scriptures. So the word equity is used in some parts of the scriptures and it is used in a general sense because it is actually reasonable that the Bible cannot be talking about law technically. So equity as used in the scripture is used in its general sense, and I have two examples of such scriptures here. One is Isaiah 11 verse 4 and Isaiah 59 verse 14. So if you go to this two scripture, you see the word equity and it is used in the general sense. So that is the first meaning of equity, the general sense. Let's now proceed to look at equity in a broad sense, in its technical sense, in its legal sense, in its narrow sense. Sorry, I first mentioned broad sense, not broad. In its narrow, the one we just finished looking at is the broad sense. So in its narrow sense, you can say in the narrow sense or technical sense or legal sense or uncommon sense. So in this sense, what is equity in its technical sense or in its legal sense, the legal meaning? Equity in its technical sense means the body of rules or the system of law is a system of law which was developed, formulated, administered, and applied by the English Court of Chancery before the Judicature Act of 1873 and 1875. That is how equity can be explained in its technical sense, that it is a system of law developed, applied, and administered by the Court of Chancery before 1873 and 1875 to mitigate the rigors and the harshness of common law. So, what are the takeaways in that definition? The takeaways in that definition is that equity is a system of law that was developed by a particular court and was also applied, administered by that particular court before a particular year. And which court is that? The Court of Chancery, the English Court of Chancery, also regarded as the English Court of Justice. So there was a court in England regarded as the Court of Chancery. Before the year 1873 and 1875, that court applied a system of law, a body of rules, It is that rule we are talking about. That rule is known as equity. Equity was applied, was developed, formulated by the Court of Chancery, and it was not formulated in vacuum. It was formulated, developed, and applied to mitigate another system of law known as the common law. So, equity was developed to mitigate the rigors of common law. It was applied by the Court of Chancery. Now, one thing that should be taken note of in this definition is that equity, as defined, has two limitations. It is limited to a court and a particular period. As I've just said, it was applied by a particular court, which was the Court of Chancery, and it was applied by that particular court in the year before 1873 and 1875. That was when that court applied that body of law known as equity. Before the year 1873 and 1875, that was when the Court of Chancery applied equity. Meaning that, so there's limitation as to court. Before 1873 and 1870, it was applied by only the Court of Chancery. It will be proper to say so. Then, it was also applied by a particular court, which is the Court of Chancery. That's the two key things to note in that definition. Then another thing, that it was applied to mitigate the rigors of common law. Now, as we have seen, we said that it was applied before 1873 and 1875. What now happened after 1873 and 1875? After 1873 and 1875, as we shall see later when we proceed with the history of equity, it was no longer the Court of Chancery that applied equity. It was not only the Court of Chancery, because the system of administration of justice was fused. So other superior courts in England also apply equity. Therefore, defining it as a body or a system of law that was applied by the Court of Chancery will no longer be appropriate. That definition will no longer be appropriate and satisfactory today. So, what is now the satisfactory and the appropriate definition? The satisfactory and the appropriate definition would be the one given by Maitland. So, Maitland now defined equity in relation to the period before the Judicature Act and the period after the Judicature Act. So let's see what Maitland say about equity, which is now relevant. It said, prior to 1875, equity is that body of rules which was administered only by those courts which were known as the Court of Equity. So you see the statement of Maitland regarding equity, submission regarding equity, that before 1875, equity is a body of rules which was administered only by those courts which were known as Court of Equity. So that's what I've said, that Maitland is also supporting and affirming that it was a body of rules administered by those courts known as the Court of Equity before 1875. Also, he gave a definition which is also relevant after 1875. He stated, equity now is that body of rules administered by our English Court of Justice, which, were it not for the operation of the Judicature Acts, would have been administered only by those courts which will be known as the courts of equity. So you can see is a submission on equity which is relevant to which can be a satisfactory definition after the Judicature Act of 1875, that is submitted that it is the body of rules administered, which were it not for the Judicature Act would have been administered only by those courts which were known as the courts of equity. So you can now define equity as the body of rules or a system of law which, were it not for the Judicature Act, would have been administered only by the courts of equity. So it was the courts of equity only that would have administered it, were it not for the Judicature Act that now fused the system of administration of justice, and other courts now apply and administer equity. So you can also, if you are defining equity in a technical sense, you can give the definition in relation to the period before the Judicature Act and the definition in relation to the period after the Judicature Act. So that's how best the word equity can be explained. So in the next video, we shall continue with the history of equity. As I've said, that this topic cannot be exhausted in a single video. So you watch out for the next video so that you can, continue and understand the full crux of this discussion. Thank you. Very important, very important. If you have not subscribed, don't forget to subscribe, and also like, share, and comment. See you in the next video.